Welcome, everybody. We're about 1 minute away from starting the webinar today. So sit tight and we'll be back in 1 minute. All right, welcome everybody. This is Rosalind Bandy. I'm the VP of Sustainability for TLMI, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's presentation, which is going to be an overview of the Sustainable Green Printing Partnership certification. And what's really cool about today's presentation is that it's being done by the SGP lead auditor. So if there are any tricks and tools of the trade to be learned, she's the one who will be able to tell you about it. The webinar today is brought to you by TLMI's Center of Excellence Education Programming. The Center of Excellence covers the topics of sustainability, workforce recruitment, financials, communication tools, and labor leadership. And I just want to give a quick reminder to all of the TLMI members to please send in your ratio study reports. A little bit of housekeeping. The lines are all muted. This is, kind of standard webinar stuff. The lines are all muted, but please type any questions or comments you have into the chat box. And after the presentation, we'll have a chance to get to them toward the end of our hour. So now I would like to introduce Wendy Nadan, who will do our presentation today. Wendy, take it away.
Thank you, Rosalind, and thank you for everybody who is joining us this afternoon. It's this afternoon where I am anyway, in Eastern Standard Time. A very cold and snowy day, so a good day to be indoors and looking at some of these things. As Rosalind mentioned, I am the lead auditor at SGP, and I have performed in that role for more than 10 years now. I wasn't quite the original, but I joined SGP about 1 year after it was initiated and after the initial beta test sites went through the program. So I've been around for a long time, and I have seen SGP evolve over those 10 years to where it is today. I'm also an ISO 14001 lead auditor, which is how I got my entree into auditing, shall we say. So I do a combination of those two programs mostly. There is a team of auditors at SGP. I am not the only auditor that there is. So there are a number of other individuals who are distributed around the US. So once you come to certification, it wouldn't necessarily be myself that would actually complete your certification audit. But I coordinate the audit program. I supervise those auditors, the goal of which is to maintain conformity across all of those different auditors. So what I'm going to do today is take you through some elements of the SGP program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the sustainability model that SGP has adopted and how it built its sustainability management system around that. Quick look at SGP and what the elements in the program are. Then moving on to the SMS itself, how it works, and how it's applied to the print industry in particular. And then finally, and I never incorporated this into my presentations before, it's relatively new, but this was something that was introduced 2 or 3 years ago, I'm thinking now, which is an online tool that I'm calling the Sustainability Tracker. And this has really lifted the standards at SGP, and all of the facilities that were certified prior to the tracker coming online and have used it since really appreciate the benefits of this tool. So we'll take a quick look at that at the end. So sustainability programs, and you've probably seen a few of those. You come across them in various guises. There are retail brands that have sustainability programs. There are other kind of enterprises that have them. So I'm sure you've run across these before. Some of them are a bit loosey-goosey, to be honest. And some of them really have some depth and some meat to them. But there are variances depending on what the goals of the organization are. SGP adopted the model, which is the 3 pillars of sustainability, which is people, planet, and profit. So as this diagram on this slide attempts to illustrate, sustainability is where those 3 pillars intersect. So environmental management systems, for example, typically just focus on the planet part of things. They're not concerned about the people aspect of it, and they're not particularly concerned about economic performance. A sustainable organization isn't going to be around for very long if it's a business enterprise, if it isn't profitable. So that's where the profit element comes into sustainability management systems, because that is really the raison d'etre of businesses. The people part of it is multi-pronged. It includes the people within your organization, so your employees, but it also includes people outside of your organization. So it will include the community in which you operate and also the people in your supply chain, so the customers and your vendors as well. So that's the 3-pillar model of sustainability. And you've likely seen this in other places. It is becoming the standard model for sustainable programs now. So how does SGP fit into that? SGP, the Sustainable Green Printing Partnership, is an independent organization that is not tied to any particular organization or association. So there isn't a hidden agenda to SGP. SGP has adopted a set of certification criteria for any facility that wants to become certified, and currently that only extends to printers, although SGP is looking at extending it to suppliers very shortly. And it includes a third-party certification system. So what does that mean? The goal of a third-party certification system is to make it objective, so that it's not a rubber stamping kind of exercise by the facility. They can't run through a checklist and then say, yep, we've done it, stick their hand up and be able to claim this certification. The third-party certification adds a layer of credibility to any kind of certification program. So ISO management system programs, for example, all have third-party certification systems. So that is how SGP is structured. So digging down into SGP a little bit more, SGP, the program that certified printers have developed and implemented, is a holistic program. So it looks not only at what happens in their facility, but it also looks at the buildings and grounds. It looks at their supply chain, and it looks at social aspects of their business. And what does this give to the printing community? So the benefits of SGP are that it's a benchmarking. So it is intended to be a standard that an average printer cannot attain without putting in some additional effort. It's intended to be targeted for those facilities that go above and beyond industry average practices. So SGP provides a transparent process that includes a public commitment to meeting certain goals. So part of that transparency is that SGP has a website that is available to the public. On that website is listed all of the certified facilities, as well as the criteria that are used to certify those facilities. The actual certification criteria, when they're developed, and they go through, I believe it's a 5-year review cycle, currently coming up this year. Those changes are also put out public review so that the public at large can comment on the certification criteria, again, to make the system robust, transparent, and credible. So some of those stakeholders are printers and suppliers. There are some NGOs who are involved in that public consultation program, and occasionally government agencies will participate in that as well. And another driving part of SGP is, without diluting the transparency and the third-party validation of the programs, is that it is provided at a reasonable cost for the printer. So the goal is to make it available to not only very large printing establishments, but also to some of the smaller printing establishments, and not price it out of range for any particular organization. I believe one of the organizations, the smallest one that we've had in the history of SGP, has had less than 10 employees, for example. And obviously, the smaller you are, the smaller the scope of the criteria and the simpler your management system is going to be. But the criteria is adaptable regardless of the size of your organization. A little bit tiny. I apologize for the size of the print here. I did cannibalize somewhat some previous presentations. So the SGP program follows these general steps. A facility will apply to the program. That's a formal application. They'll submit their fee, and they'll be added to the list of SGP applicants. They'll be given access to the impact tracker, and they will be given access to the support documents SGP has developed to assist facilities in putting together their sustainability management system. I also work with applicants quite extensively sometimes to provide that support. So there is a lot of support available to applicants. Once the facility has put in place their management system, once they've completed the required activities, they've been through the plan, do, check, act cycle, and they're ready for audit, they go through the pre-audit process, which is a document review to determine whether they are in fact ready for audit. Then they have the audit, which always used to be an on-site audit until COVID came along. That, our bedfellow at the moment that has changed the ways that we do anything. And then on completion of the audit, the facility is certified, and then they start on their next plan, do, check, Act cycle, which is on a 2-year cycle. So SGP is on a 2-year external audit cycle towards recertification. So that's the way that it works in a very 30,000-foot overview type of look at things. So SGP, your program, is a set of policies and procedures that your company follows to meet the objectives that you set. And typically, you know, pre-SGP, smaller organizations might not very well have had a documented system. Some small organizations are very flexible and they do things verbally. If their organization is small, that's a manageable way of doing things, whereas larger organizations, you can't do that. You can't keep track of everything, and you can't keep track of the number of employees and who knows what. So larger organizations pre-SGP tended to have more of a structured approach to things. But regardless of where you were before you entered the program, SGP requires all of the Sustainability Management System, or SMS. So all management systems, regardless of what it is that they are targeted at, follow a plan, do, check, act cycle. So one of the earliest management systems was quality management. This follows exactly the same process. Environmental management systems follow this exact same process. So sustainability has come on the heels of those management systems, and it works exactly the same way. It's a continuous improvement model, and I know that's a cliche and people toss that out all the time, but truly it is, so that each time you go through the annual cycle, you learn more about your facility, your customers, your processes, and you identify ways that you can do better each time, essentially. So planning is about thinking about what you're going to do. It's about developing policies and written procedures. And in terms of SGP, you would set up a committee and set goals. It's planning. You're deciding on what it is that you want to do and how are you going to do it. The do part is putting into place what you plan to do. So you've got some policies and written procedures. You need to roll those out to your employees, maybe to your contractors, and maybe to some other external parties, so that they understand what it is you're expecting them to do. And you will also need to communicate to your supply chain, because the supply chain is included in the scope of the SGP SMS. So once you've planned what you're going to do, you know what it is you're trying to achieve, you've figured out how you're going to do it, and you've rolled that out. After a certain period of time, you're going to check to see how well you've done in that development and implementation process. So you're going to measure key performance indicators, which would be things such as energy usage and material usage, waste, and those kinds of things. You'll complete specified audits and assessments, the goal of which is to identify how are we performing now, what are the opportunities that exist for us to improve, and are any of those realistic for us? And the final stage is to act, which is to implement those opportunities for improvement, those recommendations, or those non-compliances, if you like, that you've identified in audits and assessments in the checking cycle. So this plan, do, check, act is something that you'll go through every single year as part of your SGP program. So the planning process, just to dive into it in a little bit more depth as it relates to SGP, you're required to have a written sustainability policy, and then you're required to develop written procedures that describe how your committee is going to work and how it's going to be constituted, excuse me, and how it's going to communicate what it does out to your organization. You'll need to have written procedures on implementation and operation, checking and corrective action, and then management's final participation and review of your system. And another couple of things that fall within the planning part are you'll need to control your documents or your written procedures. Who has access to revising those, and how do you know which is the latest version of them? So in addition to having written procedures, some of the planning elements also requires documentation. So moving on to the do part within SGP, under planning you would identify an annual project that would have a specific target that you're aiming to meet at the end of the year. So as part of the implementation or the doing, you would train the impacted employees as to what that project is and what they need to do to meet that objective or that target. You'll need to train your employees and your contractors on the best practices that you've identified for your facilities, which will be things like how to manage solid waste, how to minimize transportation, both for incoming raw materials and outgoing shipments, to minimize tailpipe emissions. That's the big issue with transportation at the moment. Energy use, how to select the materials with the lowest environmental footprint. These are the best practices that are all embedded within the SGP certification criteria. And part of the doing also is to communicate your program up and down your supply chain and solicit support in what you're trying to achieve within your facility. So the idea of that is that you can control what happens within your facility. You can't dictate to your customers what materials they supply or how they design their product, but you can communicate with them and you can educate them about the implications of their choices. And part of doing is also to implement the best practices that are documented in the certification criteria. So the checking part, specifically in SGP, you're required to collect metrics every year. You're required to check the results track the results of your annual project, whatever it is you've selected, and there's pretty wide open what you can choose as an annual project. The Sustainability Committee is intended to be used to monitor your sustainability program, so that's part of the checking function. And some of the specific assessments that you'll need to do are an energy audit, an air emissions assessment, which is an environmental assessment, emissions of VOCs or HAPs of the environment, an assessment of indoor air quality, which is a safety and health assessment, and 2 regulatory compliance audits, so one for the environment and one for safety and health. And then finally, once you've completed all these assessments of how you're performing within your facility, then you'd complete an internal audit of your complete sustainability management system. So that's intended to mirror what your external SGP auditor would do. So it's your opportunity to go and take a deep dive into what you're doing, look and see what you're doing well, look and see maybe where some gaps are, and look for opportunities for improvement. And then once you've done all of this checking, then your management takes a look at the entire performance of the SMS, or a very high-level review, to determine how well the SMS has performed and whether there need to be any adjustments for the following year. So that's the checking part. And then the acting part, I think that's pretty obvious. Once you've completed all of your assessments and audits, the items that you've identified as opportunities for improvement, you act on those, you implement corrective actions, and you build that into your program for the upcoming year. So that could be, for example, if you've identified an opportunity to reduce energy usage in your energy audit, maybe you haven't yet got LED lights in your facility, for example. Maybe you've identified that that is now economically feasible, so that might be something that you'd want to act on your energy audit, for example, just to throw something out there to give you an idea of what that might look like. So I've mentioned best practices a couple of times. I've just kind of tossed that out there. So what exactly are best practices? They are spelled out in the certification criteria. So when you're developing your sustainability management system, then I always recommend that you use the certification criteria as your guide, because that is what you're going to be audited against, those certification criteria. So the audit process is that the SGP auditor will be looking for evidence that you have implemented everything that's listed in that SGP criteria that applies to your facility. So that when you're implementing, that's your kind of go-to document to make sure that you are ready for audit. So what are these best practices? So I've thrown a bunch of them up on the slide here. So there are social best practices that include both employees and the community. And this could be things like, have you investigated working with the community in ways to assist them? And typical things that facilities do could be a garbage pickup in a local area. There are facilities that participate in Adopt a Highway. They do food drives. They work with other charitable organizations to donate things. These are typical kinds of things that some organizations either participate in or they investigate and consider participating in. Another best practice is to look at what is your process for selecting materials and equipment. Is there consideration given to the environmental aspects of those? So obviously you're going to purchase new equipment because it meets a production need, but do you also look at energy usage? Do you also look at waste generation? Do you also look at the efficiency of that new equipment? Because those all have direct environmental impacts on your processes. Chemical management, again, what is your process when you select your chemicals, both for production and for things like ground management and for janitorial services? Do you look at using the chemicals, the materials that have the lowest hazard rating, for want of a better way of putting it, lower VOCs, when you choose those materials? A big one, solid waste management, and this goes back to the 3 R's. Have you investigated ways to reduce the amount of waste that you generate? So that would be from packaging and from your production processes as well. Do you reuse any of those waste materials? So specifically packaging, are there ways you can reuse it? So I think most facilities reuse pallets. A lot of facilities will reuse paper for stuffing boxes, for example. And finally, the materials that you can't reduce and reuse, how much of it can you recycle? Transportation management is a bit trickier, but basically it's all about minimizing transport miles to reduce the burden of tailpipe emissions. Utilities and energy management, and this is directed towards conservation of natural resources if we're talking about water and fossil fuels. If we're talking about electricity that's generated from coal or natural gas, for example, that will contribute to your carbon footprint. So these are considerations in the best practices and your environmental performance. And all of these best practices generally require some kind of documentation to indicate that you've looked at them and or what have you done to address them. So how do you incorporate SGP into your operation? So here are just a few random things that I've pulled out, which are kind of like guiding principles when you're putting together your SGP program. So you need to have senior management support. If senior management aren't behind it, and I think everybody knows this, that if there isn't clear support from the top, then as you trickle down through the organization, you're not going to get a lot of support from anybody else either. So it's very important that that's communicated right from the get-go. Incorporate the sustainability management system into every area of your business. So sometimes sales are overlooked. Sales are part of the communication piece. They communicate your program and they can educate your customers. Purchasing make decisions regarding the materials and sometimes the equipment, but equipment purchases very often are made by senior management. Shipping and logistics should be part of your system, as well as the obvious part, which is manufacturing. So if it's going to work, and if your sustainability management system is going to be successful, it needs to be integrated into everyday operations and piggybacks on to what folks are already doing. If you create new work and new tasks for people, yeah, you know, they're going to do it when the interest is there at the beginning, when you're getting ready for certification. But over time, they're going to get less and less enthusiastic that you've created this burden of work for them to do. It's going to start falling off the priority list. So just tack it on to things you already do. So just some examples that facilities already do. Complete training for their employees. There's always safety and health training that needs to be done, in addition to any other training that you might have in your organization. So when SGP calls for training, just piggyback it onto that. And SGP training shouldn't be very long or very onerous, so it might add 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be very detailed and very onerous. Communication, again, utilize existing channels. So if you're communicating to your supply chain, then you can use your sales staff that already have contacts with your customers, and bring sales into the loop so they incorporate sustainability information. And usually I find when I visit facilities, sales already do this because it is a way to differentiate your organization from the competition. So sustainability can be incorporated when your customers come on site to tours, for example, and when they meet for annual sales meetings. Vendors, your purchasing department are having communications with vendors all the time. So again, at those points in time, just have them touch on sustainability as well. And use your website to communicate your sustainability story. So all of those ways are ways to tell people what you're doing and also meet your obligations under SGP. So employee training is key. Employees need to be aware of what SGP requires and what their role and responsibilities are. And a key part of that is to try and avoid having a coordinator type of person who carries the burden for all of this and tries to and ends up being the point person. It's much better if it is delegated out, so that everybody plays a role and does their part into implementing all the requirements of SGP. And very often the folks on the shop floor have lots of ideas and are invested in ways that they can improve, especially things like solid waste management, and make things streamlined and make things go more easily. So I'm just going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes now talking about what I call the sustainability tracker. So this is an online tool. Once you formally apply to SGP, you will be given access to this website, and you can have as many of your employees with a login and access as you wish. It doesn't just have to be one person. You can have 2 or 3, and each of those people can have different responsibilities for maintaining different parts of this website if you so wish. And sometimes that works better, again, because if you have one person that's responsible for everything and that person moves on, then you're a little bit vulnerable that you're kind of scrabbling around and starting from scratch trying to figure out how it works. So this is the demo tracker. This isn't actually the SGP one, so I didn't want to put an SGP facility up here, obviously because there's confidential information in here. So as lead auditor, I have access to everybody's facility. Once you are logged in, you can only access your site. Nobody else, no other SGP facility can access your data. So you are just given authority to access your own information. So on the left-hand side at the very top, under where it says Demo Tracker, this is actually set up to screenshot with groups. So you can change that facilities, and then the drop-down box under all, you would select your facility and click on it, and it would take you into the website. But this is the landing page. And what this does is you can select any of the metrics, and it will show you over whatever time period you choose what the trend is for either your facility or for everybody in your group. So you could look at electricity usage, for example, and you could see the trend over time for all of the SGP facilities. I don't care for this very much, this page, if you look at everybody, but if you look at your facility, once you build up data for 2 or 3 years, you can definitely see the trends in things like electricity usage, solid waste, in recycling, any of those metrics. It gives you a very good visual as to how your system is performing. So up on the top, where the blue and that red button are, because this is a demo tracker, there's one missing. There is another button there which allows you to look at something called an engagement display. So I pulled this from one facility. I've blocked out who they are, but you can screen through here. So you can see there's forward and back arrows, and it pulls up some metrics that put your energy usage and waste and water usage into a form that maybe is a little bit more digestible. So this particular facility uses as much energy as 226 homes. They produce as much waste as 10 homes and as much water as 20 homes. And again, it's just a nice little display, and you can pull that out if you like, and you can use that for your sales team to use any of these informatics that they put together for you on the tracker. Obviously, you have to load a year's worth of data before you can generate anything here under this engagement display. But once you've got data in there, there are these tools that you can play around with, and you can see how well you are performing. So once you get into the tracker, this is the landing page for your particular facility. So this facility is an applicant because there is no certification loaded here. It basically gives you an overview of what the program is. So if you were actually certified, it would give you the date of your certification and when you're due for recertification and what your status is. So across the top, there are tabs. So we're on the certification status. The next tab is procedures and best practices. There's an internal verification. The resource library are where all the guidance documents and the certification criteria are housed. So if you want to access those, that's where you can go to get them. And the final tab is for the auditors, so you won't even have access to that. So if you just take a look at that, there's only really 2 tabs probably that you are going to be mostly working with, the procedures and best practices and the internal verification. So this is the procedures and best practices. So when you are an applicant, you will need to populate each one of these items on the procedures and best practices. So you will need to develop and implement each one of the written procedures in the top section of this tab. You can see on the right that it gives you the status of each of these items, so that when you are ready to post your document here, you just click on the upload file, and then it will give you a status of which individual uploaded it and on what date. If you don't have the bones to develop these written procedures, there is a template, and you can download that template and then customize it, edit it, to make it reflect what you would actually do. So you can see that there are templates for almost every required activity for SGP, which are just starting points for you. You're not obligated to use these templates. If you have another method for doing any of these, that's fine. If you want to develop one in-house, that's absolutely fine. but they are there for you to use if you're not quite sure how to get started. Under the best management practices, these are a selection of a few items which are really designed to aid the auditor to understand what's happening on your facility during the pre-audit review. But again, you need to upload a document for each one of these items here. So moving on to the internal verification, this is what that page would look like if you opened it out and if you were in the certification process. And again, you will need to upload a document for each one of these items. And you can see it will give you a status in real time. So for this particular facility, which is just a demo facility, they have uploaded, for example, their metrics part 1, but they haven't uploaded anything else. So it acts as a to-do list. Here are the things that we've completed, and here are the things we still need to do. And if you open up under each one of those items, it says not started, or almost all of these items, there is a template in here as well that you can use if you wish to. So once you have uploaded all of those documents, at the very top, where it says that your 2020 initial certification report is in progress, it will change to say complete. And when it says complete, and if your procedures and best practices tab is also populated, then you are ready for your certification audit. So a brief overview, a lot of information there. I think we're doing okay for time, so I can open it up for questions. If there is anything that I can expand on, or if I wasn't clear about, then feel free, fire away, and I will do my best to answer your questions.
Thanks, Wendy. We do have a few questions. Right now, tell me if I'm right here, the SGP certification is only available in the US and Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And the impact tracker is only in English, that we don't provide it in other languages such as Spanish, French, etc. Is that correct? Wendy, did we lose you? All right, I don't think we have Wendy on the line anymore. Hopefully she will return. I'm going to do my best. I am also on the board of directors of the of SGP, so I'm going to do my best to answer the questions, and then hopefully, looks like she's trying to join us again. Hopefully Wendy will be back. So the question is, we have 4 plants. Does each plant have to have its own SGP process? Can we do them at different times? The answer is yes. Each plant can be SGP certified. You know, some or all plants can be SGP certified, and they can be done at different times. I believe there is a multi-plant discount if you approach it in that way, but you
I am sorry, I lost.
You're back.
I lost connection. I am back. I apologize about that.
No worries. I'm doing my best to answer the question, but I'm going to hand it off to you. The question is, if we have multiple plants, does each plant have to have its own SGP process, and can we do them at different times?
So there is a multi-facility certification. So if it really only kicks in if you've got 3 or more facilities, if you've got 2 facilities, and each facility would have to do a complete certification. But provided that your facilities are similar in nature in terms of the printing process they do, and provided that they implement the same SMS, i.e. they have the same written procedures and they work on the same annual projects, then you can standardize your SMS across your facilities, and then not every facility requires a full audit on the audit cycle. So generally speaking, it follows the square root rule. So if you have 4 facilities, 2 facilities at certification would require a full audit, and the other 2 would get an abbreviated desktop audit. And then in the 2-year next audit cycle, the 2 facilities that didn't have the on-site audit would be audited on-site, and the other 2 would get a desktop. So there is that multi-facility option available. Now, if they're not already at the same time, you can, and we are in this situation at the moment, the initial facility can get certified. The second facility that is ready would also have a full certification, and then you would start to add them in, following the kind of rule for the number of facilities that need to be certified. You would then be tied to the 2-year cycle based on the original facility, though.
Great, thank you. Can you give a rundown of the approximate costs?
Oh, I'm not the right person to answer this because I don't have anything to do with.
I know that the application fee is $600 for TLMI members, and that includes the license to the impact tracker, which can be used by multiple people. And then in addition to that, there is an audit fee. And I think that's it. And the audit fee is approximately $1,500. You know, if you have a specific question about cost, please email me and I will get that exact information for you.
Yes, and I'm a little bit leery of giving you some numbers because I have nothing to do with it. I do hear the numbers all the time, but it just kind of goes over my head because the treasurer handles all of the money related things. So there would be an initial application fee. Then when you get certified, there's the audit fee. And then on the 2-year cycle, then every year there'd be an annual renewal fee for the tracker. And again, on the 2-year audit cycle, there would be the audit fee and renewal again. That's generally how it works. But for the dollar figures, yeah, we can send you specifics of those if you can email in what it is that you need to know.
Right, we'll get that specific answer for you. One of the things that people find really intriguing, Wendy, is, and you had a really good slide about this, was integrating this into your current processes. You know, if you're having, let's say, a monthly meeting, or you have a quarterly training or something like that, so that you don't have to make this a completely separate process from what you're already doing. I wonder if you might have some examples of things that you've seen that you thought were, you know, really clever or impressed you or were, you know, a good idea.
So communication is a key part of the SGP program, and about bringing all the stakeholders together, so internal and external stakeholders. So I have been at a facility which was a digital printing point of purchase kind of facility, manufacturing facility, and they had a very long corridor, and they used that, and they printed in-house, obviously, very large graphics about all kinds of things related to sustainability. So as you walked along this corridor, which you had to because that's how the employees access the facilities, whether you liked it or not, you could see all of these large graphics that I have to say were very well designed because it was clear what the message was they were trying to communicate. Every day you saw these graphics, and they were about different elements of the sustainability program, but about how shall I say it, about the impact of certain things. And I thought it was incredibly well done. So, for example, you could buy a bulletin board or a notice board, and when something's new, you might look at it, but then you ignore it after that. So the value for bulletin boards is somewhat limited, but if you have very large, colorful graphics, people can't not look at them. And so constantly it reinforces the message that you're trying to get across. And I thought that was incredibly well done. And once the initial effort has been made, obviously somebody designed it and they manufactured it and they installed it, then there was no effort anymore on the communication piece. And I thought it was incredibly effective. And I always encourage facilities to look and see if there are spaces in their building where they can put up graphics, very large, just visual, and there's very little words involved, just visual, just graphics that communicate what it is you're trying to get across. So that's one example, and I know that's quite intensive up front, and it depends on the skill set in your facility. But other facilities, for example, sometimes they have weekly department meetings, sometimes they have monthly, and they'll just toss in every monthly meeting something about sustainability for maybe 5 minutes. It might be about the recycling program. It might be about something they could do at home, for example, about recycling batteries, not throwing them in the garbage, anything you choose. And it's the repetition part of it that makes it effective. So you can have, you can sit everybody down for 30 minutes in a room and you can give them a lot of information, everything you want to give them about SGP to meet your requirements. But as a trainer myself, I know after about 10 minutes, people's eyes glaze over and you kind of lost them at that point. They can only assimilate so much information. So small, manageable bites more frequently is much more effective. And just piggyback it on, whatever you're doing, just add it in. If you have newsletters, just add something in all the time. But graphics definitely help.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That is the end of our questions. And I just want to invite all the participants today, all of our attendees, if you have follow-up questions, please email them to me and I will put you in touch with Wendy and we'll go from there. So thank you all for attending, and thank you especially to Wendy Nadan, lead auditor of SGP. And I hope you have a rest of your day healthy and safe. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.